I'm a member. Thank you. My name is Chrystia Chomyak, and I'm a member of the Ukraine Solidarity Information Group in Canada. This is, and I want to welcome you to our first webinar. Firstly, I'd like to just welcome our participants. Thank you very much for taking the time to participate in this webinar and to share your information with us. Our goal is to spread information about the situation in Ukraine to a progressive left-wing audience. We think that that's very important. So thank you very much for your participation. I'd like to just tell you a few of our rules, a few housekeeping rules. Chat is turned off for participants, but our panelists and our moderators can see the messages. I want to introduce you also to two of the other moderators. It's Marianne and Mike. They are going to be looking at the questions, and after the panelists have spoken, they will put forward the questions that you post. All people who are attending this webinar will be able to see the questions that other people post. So, do take a look at those. And this webinar is being recorded. So if anybody has any issues with that, please let us know. For you to know, all the panelists will be able to share their screens with the audience. So thank you very much. So, the title of our first webinar is Feminism and the Situation of Women in Ukraine Since the Full-Scale Russian Invasion. It is, of course, a question of great concern, and I'm very happy that we are going to be able to talk about it. We have three panelists: Olesia Briazgunova. She is the International Secretary of the Confederation of Free Trade Unions of Ukraine, as well as a member of its Gender Equity Committee. Our second panelist is Oksana Dutchak. We're very happy that she is able to participate because of the problems with electricity in Ukraine. She is the editor of Commons, Spільне, and a sociologist with a particular interest in women's issues. And our third panelist is Tamara Martsenyuk. She's an associate professor at Kyiv-Mohyla Academy and is currently working on women and gender equality in the Ukrainian Armed Forces. So welcome all of you. Each panelist will have 20 minutes, and I will interrupt you near the end of your 20 minutes, around 18 minutes. I will let you know that your time is coming to an end. So let us start with the first panelist, and that is Olesia. Please, Olesia, the floor is yours.
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you, of course, for organizing this important meeting, because we are grateful for sharing the information about the war in Ukraine, and especially with a feminist perspective. I work in a trade union center, the second largest trade union center in Ukraine. And I want to just highlight the situation in Ukraine and at the workplaces, and what trade unions are doing to help female workers, and as well as female internally displaced people, because a lot of female workers lost their homes and lost their jobs because of the war. Our trade union has experience of work with women, female workers affected by the war since 2014, because Historically, we have a strong trade unions, had strong trade unions in Donbas region because my Confederation of Free Trade Unions started, it was established after the minor strikes in Donbas region. And we know we had an experience of work with internally displaced people, female workers, female members, but since the full-scale invasion in 2022, the scale of tasks and the scale of problems was really huge for us because it was the start of the full-scale war started with the missiles attacks, bombarding, and also huge terror and violence at the occupied territories. As a trade union, we started to have to provide help with our members, and not only our members, all female workers in different regions, mothers with children, in the way to help them to evacuate from their cities near the battle zones, and help them to find accommodation. It was really hard because the flow of internally displaced people was really huge, and we appreciate the help from the side of trade unions from European countries who provide shelters to Ukrainian refugees, mostly of whom were women with children, and there is still a flow of refugees from Ukraine to Europe, not so huge as it was in 2022, but still. Why? Because, for example, the Donetsk region is under the heavy shellings from the side of the Russian forces. And even today, mining cities in Donetsk regions were under attacks, under the missiles and attacks, and also bombings from the side of Russian forces. And there are still mining enterprises that are still working in this region, and female workers are still working in this area. But a lot of female workers and families, they decided to flee from this area because it's too dangerous to work there. As a trade union, we try to do everything possible to safeguard these female workers, but it's really hard because we don't have, as a trade union, we don't have a air defense system to protect female workers at the mines from the shellings. And the problem is that mostly female workers employed at the not in the profession who work inside of the mine, but at the different positions to help that provide at the servants. So they work as a servants, and it's a challenge how to protect these women, how to ensure that they will be able to go to shelter or inside in the mine if there is the shellings. We work with employers to make everything possible to save them, but it's really hard. Another problem is that the Russian forces try to cause electricity power crisis in Ukraine, and that's why a lot of workplaces are not safe for female workers and also for male workers. If continuing the case of mines, if there is a power outages because of shellings, miners can stuck inside the mine underground, and there is a real threat to their lives because without electricity there are no pumping of water, and of course there are no fresh air, and they can die. And since the full-scale invasion, there were a lot of cases when miners stuck underground. And continuing this direction of working in the mining sector, I can say that because of the war and the process of drafting, conscripting the male workers, women started to work inside the mines in Ukraine. It was a challenge for, and it is still a challenge for trade unions. Why? For one hand, we of course support the possibility of women to work in the different fields of economy and get a good income. And we stand for equality. But on another hand, we as a trade union put on the table the problem of occupation and health. That's why our trade union, local trade unions in the mining enterprises, they started to solve this problem of certification of workplaces for female workers, because before these workplaces were certificated only for work of male workers. And there is a question for a lot of questions for ensuring the safety rules for female workers and ensuring the even the proper uniform for female workers, because in such at such enterprises like mining, it's really important to have a good uniform that suit to women, not a male uniform that's just a smaller size. And also there is as you know, in Ukraine there were a list of forbidden professions that are forbidden for employment of women. This list was we don't have this list anymore, but at the same time we faced with the problem of work with legislative acts, rules, because on one hand we don't have anymore this this act that did not allow women to work, for example, in mining sector or be a bus drivers. But at the same time, there are a certain list of rules from different sectors that are still forbidden these works. That's why trade unions highlighted this problem, and with the government side, unions try to solve this problem of changing legislation. But at the same time, trade unions continuing to promote the decent work and decent working condition for women. Our position is that yes, it's crucial to provide employment for women, but at the same time, don't forget about the decent working condition. So if we open up a possibility to work inside the mine underground, employer should do everything possible to ensure safety for female workers. The same situation in different spheres of economy. So that's why trade unions, even in time of the war, continuing to work in this field to ensuring the decent work and safe working condition. Because if there are no ensuring occupation and healthy rules, there will be increase in accidents, and there are threats to lives of women. And as I told you before, there is additional threats and risks for female workers because of missiles attacks, shellings from the side of the Russian forces. And Russian forces aimingly targeted workplaces, especially hospitals, kindergartens, schools, energy objects to cause more casualties, to cause more problems in energy and economy in Ukraine. As you might know, that on the 8th of July, there was a huge missiles attack on Kyiv and different cities of Ukraine, and female medical workers were killed at their workplaces. And today in Ukraine is a day of medical workers, and a lot of women work in this sphere, and now they work under the huge stress and under huge risks, because anytime a Russian missile can hit a hospital, and not all medical workers can leave their workplaces or take for example, a child during the surgery and go to basement. It's a problem for them. That's why they are heroes in Ukraine, because they continue their work despite the shellings. Also, I want to tell about the ambulance workers. We have trade unions in different regions at the ambulances, and they work under under huge stress, also because Russians use this double tape strike. For example, they strike some object, residential building, and when ambulance workers as well as aid workers come to this place, they made a second strike to hit aid workers and ambulance workers, to cause more casualties and to postpone the rescue operation and providing aid to injured people. We have also, for example, we have our trade union organization in Zaporizhia region. There are in this union, we have members, female members, who are also internally displaced people. And I want to tell you about one case. So we have our trade union sister, who lost all her family, her daughter and granddaughter and grandson, during the missiles attack on Zaporizhia. And she faced a huge stress, and also she still live with huge pain. And how she tried to overcome this pain, she work a lot, and she said that I want to work just not to think about my pain. That's why trade unions are trying to do everything possible to provide psychological aid to such workers, but it's hard because as a trade union, we don't have such professionals in our staff. We are trying to find some projects, international support to provide aid for such workers. Also, we faced with problems that a lot of our members, female workers, faced with violence during their when they were under occupation on the territory under occupation of Russian forces. It's still even those women who faced who were victims of violence, especially including sexual violence by the Russian soldiers in 2022. They still have consequences, and they still are suffering even today, even after the course of psychological treatment. And what we are trying to do in our Confederation of Trade Unions is to organize retreats, let's say, for female activists and leaders, including those who were affected by the war and experienced violence, and try to make to make them feel that there is a sisterhood, that we are family, and also to provide such support from trade union, like to not only to say to work with provide them professional psychological aid, but also provide um, help and support from trade union sisters. Also, there is a still problem of of needs of humanitarian aid for female workers and our members, because as I told you, a lot of Ukrainian cities, especially in Kharkiv region and Donetsk region, they are still under the shellings and the missiles attacks, and workers faced with the problem that there are lack of basic things that they can't buy basic things, hygiene products, food, because of problems of supplying these goods to these mining cities, because of bad roads that was destroyed by the shellings, and also because of the constant attacks, and this cargo might be destroyed every moment by missiles. That's why trade unions try to do everything possible to provide workers with this aid, and we made a focus on female workers, because their income is lower than income of male workers in these regions. It's also a problem for a single single mother with children, and also female workers with disabilities. Their income is not enough to cover all needs, and moreover, because of war, we faced with huge inflation and economical crisis. So prices rise, but the income of female workers are still at the same level as it was before 2022 in a lot of spheres. Also, I want to tell you that despite the war, Ukrainian trade unions continuing to promote labor rights, as I told you, and also to promote gender equality. And we are also opposite to the liberalization of labor law in Ukraine, because according to our analysis, liberalization of labor law will negatively affect women, because this attempts to provide a system with 0 hours contracts and contracts without guarantees for decent work, and guarantees for long employment will make risks of discrimination, especially female workers, because employer, for example, employer might decide to sign a contract with a female worker for 8 months because she might be pregnant after 9 months, and so on. So there is risks for women of discrimination. That's why we continue to promote labor rights that ensure gender equality and ensure decent work for female workers, especially during the war, because female workers work under the stress, as I told you, and also the burden of housework is increased, because a lot of female workers lost their husband, or their partners were adopted to the Ukrainian Armed Forces. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Olesia. I don't know whether Oksana, whether you are here. I know that there were serious problems with electricity.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, Oksana, if you could, the floor is yours. Again, you have 20 minutes and I'll stop you, let you know at,
Thank you. It's not unexpected for our cards, it's scheduled, so I'm kind of prepared and adapted. And I will also speak a bit about adaptation today. I will try to show my slides. In a minute. Sure. So, do you see them?
yes, it's there.
You should go full
Okay. Full screen, right. Then I won't see my notes, but okay, let's rely on my memory. So I will speak about destruction and adaptation of care infrastructure. When I'm speaking about care infrastructure, I'm speaking about healthcare, elderly care, child care, social services, and so on. So all this infrastructure which helps externalize care work outside of the families, meaning also that it contributes greatly to gender equality because within the families, care labor is often unevenly distributed and put disproportionately on the shoulders of women. I will briefly speak about what happened before 2022. So we had the process before 2014, before the annexation of Crimea and beginning of the war in eastern Ukraine, we had the process which our government called optimization process, which the idea of which was to make the existing facilities, public infrastructure, kindergartens, schools, hospitals, to be efficient, which often mean that those facilities were closed, especially in rural areas. There is some statistics you see on the screen, I won't voice it, but the idea which I want to share here is that this starts in infrastructure and facilities. They started before 2014, but after 2014, with the annexation of Crimea, beginning of the war in eastern Ukraine and economic crisis, the government adopted the anti-crisis package, which was a classical austerity package, which leads to further closure of facilities, especially in rural areas again. In the course of the years, these anti-crisis measures were stopped to be presented as emergency measures, and instead they were consolidated into the package of holistic reforms, which now were presented as not the emergency measure, but the way the system must function, like the system of healthcare, the system of education, and so on. So, for example, for schools and hospitals, the closures of facilities continued, especially in rural areas, but not only. This was a bit different for preschool care facilities and for elderly care facilities, but still you can see that preschool facilities did not have the sufficient coverage. They did not cover children, especially in rural areas, and children beyond the age of 2. Like basically in Ukraine, there are no facilities for children, almost no facilities, public facilities for children under age of 2, and only 16% of children under age of 2 are covered by public facilities, which is twice lower than EU average, for example. Speaking about elderly care, like it's a worse situation if we speak about this care infrastructure because the facilities are very few. There are very few places and they are often in very bad conditions. So you can see that, for example, 2020, there were approximately, it's hard to find the statistics and consolidate it, but approximately 20,000 elderly people in public care institutions with a population of 7 million elderly people. So in the end, as it usually happens in Ukraine and in any other societies, those people, those families who did not have access to this care facilities, they had to manage this care work somehow inside the families, which in the context of patriarchal and society of gender inequalities often felt on, usually fall on the shoulders of women. However, with the beginning of the war, the situation escalated and broad destruction came. It came still in 2014. Because this picture, for example, is from the kindergarten in eastern Ukraine, which was shelled before the 24th of February 2022. But after that, the situation escalated dramatically, and Olesia was already mentioning the tactics when these fatalities are often explicitly targeted by Russian army. So, for example, it's hard again to calculate. I was trying to make some estimation, but when we are speaking about education, so preschool and school facilities, and also higher education, approximately 12% of educational infrastructure is either damaged or destroyed in Ukraine now. This is, of course, very uneven geographically. There is this web page where they collect the data about the damaged and destroyed education facilities, but there is no map to show it like prominently. But of course, the main destruction happened in eastern southern Ukraine and partially in northern eastern regions of Kyiv, Chernihiv, and so on. But there were also shelling in other of these facilities in other parts of Ukraine. If we speak about healthcare, approximately 14% of healthcare infrastructure is either destroyed or damaged in Ukraine. This is again a very approximate calculation. It may be also outdated because government unfortunately does not publish the regular updates on of this kind. But you see that the big part of these facilities are destroyed or damaged. If we speak about elderly care, there were also cases when elderly care facilities were targeted. There were also cases when they were not timely evacuated and ended up in occupation during the first days of the full-scale invasion. And now they're facing other problems, which I will come to that later. So for healthcare, there is this kind of map where you can see how the damage is distributed also unevenly geographically for these reasons. This is a picture of the city, the town of Mariinka in Donetsk region. It's pretty old. It came like to a kind of shock to the public. Now it's not that much shock anymore because there are many cities like this now at this point and villages. This was one of these first pictures when you see the scene of when there was a town and now it doesn't exist. And of course, all its infrastructure, healthcare, education, and so on is also gone. So in this context, the infrastructure, the care infrastructure had to adapt to existing conditions to operate in a kind of way. So here you see how it works in the case of educational institution, but in general, you should understand that according to statistics, only a bit more than half preschool facilities operate offline, and only a bit more than 1/3 of schools operate offline. Others are on distant or mixed format teaching, because only those schools and kindergartens which have shelter, which usually it's just a basement, only those facilities can operate, meaning that children can attend them physically and their families do not have to care for them. Usually their mothers do not have to care for them during the working day. However, close to the front line, this doesn't work because a basement is not enough in many, is considered not to be enough in many regions because they are very close to the front line. For example, Kharkiv, a big city, 30 kilometers from the border with Russia. And there were basically no schools operating for quite a while and kindergartens, until at some point they decided to open the underground school on the subway station, not on the subway stations, but in the rooms of the subway, so totally underground. And there were approximately a bit more than 1,000 children attending the school. Now, there was also one lyceum which managed to build a proper shelter in Kharkiv using some financing from donors. And recently they also opened a newly built school which is totally underground. But it's also like, you should understand, it's just a drop in the ocean, because the city is big, there are many children, and there are also many other cities and towns where there are no resources to make this kind of adaptation. So otherwise, families either have to stay at home with their children, if they are especially of a younger age, or they have to rely on private institutions which do not care about the regulations issued by the authorities. In the case of healthcare, it's even harder, because there is a very limited space for healthcare to operate on the distance, like online. And it also can have drastically negative impact on the quality of that healthcare if you do it online. So hospitals do various kind of adaptations. Some are evacuated, obviously. Some are using part of the so they're operating basically underground for the space they have, or they are just using sandbags and various things to make the damage the least possible. Yeah. So what does not fit here, of course, means it falls on the families. And inside the families, it usually falls on the women and on the very gendered networks, informal networks. It may be nuclear family, it may be extended family, it may be other relatives, friends, neighbors, and communities who jump in the case some to the possible extent, because they are also, not all of them have time, but they jump in to help families to manage this care work. It is nothing new. It was there before the war. It is like this in many other countries, but in the case of Ukraine, with a full-scale invasion, something changed, because the full-scale invasion interrupted this informal networks of support for Ukrainian families, either because of occupation, because of destruction, because people were killed, because people flee, and because they cross the border to seek refuge, and also because of the unprecedented decision of Ukrainian government to restrict the cross-border mobility of men, and because of the unprecedented decision of European governments to open the border for Ukrainian refugees. On the one hand, it created a huge amount of people which were able to flee the war, but also meant that their networks of support were often broken in the process, and they ended up in a foreign country without these networks. According to, as we know, 80% of refugees are women and children in the case of Ukrainians. And according to research, approximately 30% of Ukrainian refugees families consist of one adult and dependents, one adult, usually a woman. So it means that the situation of this enforced single motherhood is very widespread among Ukrainian refugees. And to deal with the situation, they use different strategies. Sometimes they flee together with their grandmothers or sisters or friends, or they have to reconstruct these networks of support on the ground, like usually connecting with other Ukrainian refugees, because they speak the same language, they are more or less in the same circumstances, and they try to support each other. But of course, these individual strategies, they do not solve the problem structurally. And on the other hand, there is this widening care gaps directly related to the war. First of one is related to those who are wounded and got disability, and they need extensive care, including soldiers and civilians. And recently, some months ago, there was this report published by the NGO Princip, which is an NGO of Ukrainian veterans. And they made a research about how this is done, like how this care is organized for those veterans who were injured and needed intensive care. And of course, the answer was the state is failing in many places. And in the end, those are families, and usually women in families, who have to take care about these veterans, because the state is failing to provide enough rehabilitation care and so on. And another part of the story, this is a story which is at least discussed and politicized. Another part of the story about the widening gaps of care related to war is elderly people. Because of the huge populational demographic shift we are facing now, because of refugee displacement and so on, there is this phenomena which is also common in many other conflicts and wars, that those are usually elderly who are staying behind, and working age people and children are trying to flee, of course. Which creates a situation where there are a lot of elderly people who need assistance in caring for them, and there is nobody to provide this assistance for them. And this is a problem, like taking into account how bad the elderly care infrastructure in Ukraine is. This is a problem which would be huge for these people, especially and their families, and unfortunately not much done about it now. Another side of the coin, there is this infrastructure. I am talking about like healthcare facilities, elderly care facilities, schools, hospitals, social services, kindergarten. These are predominantly female sectors of economy. And whenever I was speaking about cuts due to neoliberal austerity and about destructions due to Russian invasion, we are speaking about the destruction of working places where these people were working, and they were predominantly women. According to statistics, from quarter to almost 1/3 of women work in healthcare and education in Ukraine, meaning that working conditions, jobs, wages are influencing the situation of these women dramatically. And we are speaking about the sectors where labor is very poorly paid, extremely poorly. So this leads, of course, to the widening gender pay gap. And you here see the graph. And then the last arrow there is where we are now. This is not directly comparable numbers because the orange line, it's from official statistics. And that red line, it's from general polls. So there was an agency who were polling people, asking them and gathering statistics in such a way. But of course, we understand that the gap is increasing. It may be not that radical as it is here now. So beyond the individual strategies of people to cope with the problem, there is this question of structural problems, which are about access to healthcare, education, and other facilities, and also about the situation of women who work in these facilities and whose care labor is externalized outside of the families, so they are able to have their time for themselves or for their job, education, and so on. So this story is about that. So to sum up a bit, I would say in a way, so there were these neoliberal cuts, optimizations, and reforms happening before 2022, which were leading to decreasing places in education, in care infrastructure, meaning that people were not always having access to this infrastructure. I see, especially in rural areas, especially in the territories close to the front line, when it was a stable, more or less stable front line before 2022. And also, for example, internally displaced people and other categories of people. With the Russian full-scale invasion in 2022, of course, this all escalated dramatically, leading to a destruction of infrastructure, environment, networks, and meaning that we basically can now speak about the depletion of social reproduction in Ukraine. So the whole fabric of social reproduction is heavily disrupted, especially in some territories and for some categories of people. And lack of state policy to address these challenges leads to widening care gaps and impact the situation of women dramatic. Part, of course, due to EU decision to open the border for refugees, part of this social reproduction, part of this care is externalized. So we can speak about some kind of infrastructural solidarity on the side of EU countries who accept Ukrainian refugees, their children to schools, kindergartens, who take care about them in healthcare and so on. But it's still, the situation is very problematic. So, and the thing is that social reproduction, it is really hard to stop it. It will happen. Except for those cities which are totally destroyed, of course, and there are more and more cities like that. But the question is, what kind of social reproduction will happen? Will it be beneficial for families, women, gender inequality, and people who need care, whose number is increasing? And to end up, sorry, that's the red line which was missing. And my final point is that the perspective of that social reproduction and the shape it will take would be the result of social struggles. And here you see the pictures from the protests of the trade union of nurses, which is a grassroots self-organized movement, which brings some hope and which are trying to address the problems in that sector and question the state policies in general. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And now we'll go to our third panelist, and that is Tamara.
Hello, thanks a lot for inviting me for your event. And as a public sociologist, feminist, and higher education activist, I will share some of my research results with you that is connected with feminism and women's activism in Ukraine in times of war. And actually, if you are interested what is done in area studies about women's activism in Euromaidan protests and also during 10 years of war, you could see that scholars pay attention to this value of human dignity. And Euromaidan protest was called Revolution of Dignity. And this concept of dignity and actually that was articulated in the Euromaidan protests, is becoming the benchmark for women fighting for their rights, and among them also for the against gender discrimination in the security and defense sector, and I will be talking about this a bit later. And these two values, dignity and equality, actually are very important part of feminism and women's activism. And in general, in mainstream literature on gender and war, you could see that very often women as a group, they portrayed first of all as victims of the situation. And of course, when you hear statistics and when you analyze situation, women are different groups of women are vulnerable groups who suffer from this situation. At the same time, you could see that Ukrainian women actively participate in different forms of resistance, and scholars like Sarah Phillips, myself, you pay attention to military, non-military forms of resistance, and also to this issue of agency that is important for this. And you could even read in different scholarships, like by Ukrainian scholar Katarina Boyko, that Ukrainian women have become a symbol of the resistance and an embodiment of Ukraine itself. And this resistance, despite the fact that some topics are very difficult, and later I will be talking about gender-based violence, and I saw from the list of questions that you are interested in this. After full-scale invasion, actually after 10 years of different feminist activism, finally, Ukraine ratified Council of Europe Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence, so-called Istanbul Convention. That was a quite hard issue due to the fact that different religious groups, some ultra-right activists, they were very against it, and so different women's groups, they've been protesting for the ratification of this document. And currently our other legislation that is in general, when we analyze gender equality, is quite well developed compared to other former Soviet Union countries, but still now it's in the process of regulating it to this convention. But what I encourage you also to do is to read different, we as a Ukrainian feminist, we are very grateful for your solidarity, but we also appeal to so-called informed solidarity. When you read a different, when you read what is written, especially by Ukrainian groups, Ukrainian scholars about this situation. And there is a feminist initiative group, The Right to Resist Manifesto, that is published on the most famous in Ukraine leftist journal Commons, and Oksana Dutchak, our previous speaker, is among now co-editors of this journal. And this feminist, they say that victimhood of Ukrainian women in war is challenge, and in reality, women play a key role of in resistance movement, and is actually important, very important to understand the position, especially for international audience. Also, there are currently for this last years a number of different books like this one edited by Jessica Zichovich. It's a collection of different scholarship articles and stories, freedom taking place, war, women and culture at the intersection of Ukraine, Poland and Belarus, where also you could read that actually in different ways Ukrainian women struggle for freedom of expression and for human rights, despite the fact that during full-scale invasion, where survival is a major issue, it's very difficult to fight for rights. Me, by myself, as a scholar and public sociologist, I was involved in a very challenging study that started 9 years ago, and this study that got metaphorical title Invisible Battalion was driven by military women who came to me, and for example among them a graduate of my university, Maria Berlinska, who was doing a reconnaissance driving drones for the armed forces, but because this combat military position was forbidden for women, she couldn't be officially hired by armed forces as a labor market, and she and other her female military, they faced gender discrimination in the armed forces as a labor market. And together with some of my other sociologist colleagues, we did a study about women's participation in the military operation in the anti-terrorist operation. It's how the war in the eastern part of Ukraine was officially called. We interviewed women, we did, so it's quite, I would say, a big study, and when we presented it in 2015, it was quite challenging because, different groups of people were quite were criticizing this study from different angles. Also, some of colleagues even from Commons Journal for the militarization of women, some radical or critical feminists also for this topic, because as far as you know, the position of this study is more like liberal feminist study. But at the same time, it was important to hear the voices of ordinary military women who wanted to defend their country and who wanted to be in part of armed forces of Ukraine security and defense sector as labor market. Later, we continued it with other aspects. As you could see, it was the situation about female veterans returning to peaceful life, because as you may imagine that as far as women were not firstly recognized, they couldn't become veterans, and so we paid attention to gender-sensitive approach. The third study was on a very also important topic of sexual harassment in the military sphere of Ukraine, and together with our third study, we did online course for the military, gender equality and combating sexual harassment in the military, that was launched a year before invasion. And despite the full-scale invasion, it's still now we have even higher figures of people who had this course and received certificates. And yes, as you could see from statistics, majority of them are men with average age of 35. So they're like military men, and it's an important issue for the dignity and equality in the armed forces. The fourth study was about women's access to military education. That is important to get access in the labor market. And fifth study, when we monitored recommendations from previous studies and research. And this sociological study, the first one, they came to the bigger advocacy campaign with this title. You could check a webpage of this campaign, where also there are some documentary about female military and about also on the issue of post-traumatic stress disorder as a challenging issue before full-scale invasion, but also that is very important now. Later a bit I will summarize what currently we have as a result with women's access to the security and defense sector. At the same time, I want to raise also some issues that are important for Ukrainian public feminists, especially when they talk to international feminists. And you could see here Tamara Zlobina, feminist and editor of popular resource Gender in Details, and she supported #campaign Arm Ukraine Now and explained why, despite the fact that a number of international feminists, especially some like leftist one from Germany and other Latin American countries, why they were against providing weapons for Ukraine. It's an important issue, and women and the voice of women, especially feminist women from Ukraine, should be heard. And also some other feminists like Daria Cymbaluk and Irina Zamuraeva, who actually are more critical, radical feminists, they wrote a piece. They wrote an article in March 2022, why we as a feminist must lobby for air defense for Ukraine. It's available online, you could read it, and they explain that we are critical of militarization, but we believe pacifism will kill, and that Russia's war crimes have left us with no option. In general, very important concept also for Ukrainian feminist activists and scholars is justice. And you could read also from the Right to Resist Feminist Manifesto from Common Spільне webpage that the Russian aggression undermines the achievements of Ukrainian feminists in the struggle against political and social oppression in the occupied territories. The Russian army uses mass rape and other forms of gender-based violence as a military strategy. Also, we have some scholars like Marta Gavryshko that wrote about the fact that sexual violence being used as a weapon of war by the Russian military since February 2022, and with women and girls being primary but not only targets. And actually it's very important that survivors of those violence, they actually also appeal to justice justice. So they justify. There are testimonies of this survivors of sexual violence, and because of their voice, it became now more known issue to fight, especially in the international justice arena. At the same time, what is important, despite the fact that it's a very difficult issue to work with, especially during full-scale invasion, still it's possible to fight against gender-based violence, sexual harassment in the Ukrainian military itself. Because you remember, as I said, that those, especially those people who joined armed forces as volunteers and for whom dignity and equality are important values, they pay attention to this. And we started this, it's hashtag also. So it's a bigger campaign. There were some court cases. It's here just this hashtag campaign, protect her, his boundaries, veterans against violence. And in general, in Ukraine, it was huge campaign even before Me Too, called "Я не боюсь сказати," I am not afraid to say it. And so this, and even recently it was petitions that gathered enough voices, and currently President of Ukraine, so it's currently under solving to launch the developed mechanism, because the mechanism against fighting against working with issues of sexual violence in the military is already developed, but due to the full-scale invasion somehow it was not launched. So there were a group of people, and among them also I forgot to pay attention to this NGO that was on my screenshot, Ukrainian Women Veteran Movement, because it's also grassroots activist NGOs that are working with different issues. And one of the leaders of this NGO, she filed this this petition against sexual harassment. And I, due to the lack of time, and it's really a very broad topic to talk about feminism and women's integration and gender equality in the military, I summarize some so-called successes and issues that are not still solved. And as for institutional mechanism, it's availability of gender policy and system of gender advisors in the armed forces, its legislative attention to ensuring gender equality in the military sphere. For example, for contract-based contract armed forces, the age of women who can work there increased from 40 till 60. But at the same time, it's the issue of stability of this mechanism and political will to implement it. And in our discussion, I would say the most interesting is armed forces as a labor market. And Olesia, in her presentation about women that are working in mines, that is also traditionally male sphere, so-called. There are a number of parallels, because you could see that here there is a list of prohibited professions in civilian life. And in our study, we paid attention to the fact that this so-called paternalistic policy that actually didn't provide military women ability to work officially in the combat positions. Also, it became possible to overcome horizontal gender segregation, where currently formally all combat military specialties are open for women. Also, it's important to overcome vertical gender segregation, where there are more women on the decision-making positions, like there are some female generals, but at the same time, there is lack of women at the level of military decision-making and among the leadership of the armed forces. You could see this when different international military political delegations are visiting different countries. And so there are some still issues that should be discussed, lifting limits for women, and Olesia was mentioning this, and it's important for military equipment. And of course, the another issue that Olesia was mentioned, the concept of gender equality, it's not only about equality itself, it's also about sensitivity, because biologically women and men are different. They have different bodies, and this gender-sensitive approach, they should be paid, they should be implemented to a greater extent if we want decent working conditions. Also, as for gender-based violence in the armed forces, as I mentioned, ratification of Istanbul Convention, that is also will have some consequences not only in civilian but in military life. It's training programs, online courses, unfortunately currently mainly different public non-governmental organizations, they provide information for survival, and for military women, they don't trust armed forces to file some complaints, and this issue receives not enough media coverage. A representation of service women and female veterans in the media changed, and the visibility of women decreased, and this topic moving away from sexist rhetoric and more on paying attention to women as professionals and recognizing the contribution of women in the war and in the resistance. But at the same time, there is still lack of women among military experts consulting by the media, and the women's experience of returning from war is not enough covered, I would say. I think I will stop here, and I will be glad to answer your questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you, all three of you. Very, very interesting, informative, and moving. We'll now go to questions. And so Marianne, the way that we'll proceed, Marianne will ask two questions from the ones that are posted, and then Mike. So Marianne, if you could ask your first question.
Okay, so the first question is for Olesia, and it says, do you have members working in territories that were occupied since 2022?
We don't have information about our members who work in the occupied territories, because mostly our members fled from occupation or were evacuated. Because since 2014, the independent trade unions were under the high risks of consequences and risks of being tortured and kidnapped by the occupied forces. And we had cases when leaders of independent trade unions were tortured and killed in 2014 and 2015. So that's why mostly our members fled from the occupied territories. We don't have information. At the same time, there are some reports, official reports, including the report of the United Nations regarding the tortures of the members of another union center. They were workers of Zaporizhia nuclear power plants, and in according to this official reported document, and as well as information from our colleagues from these unions, one employee of Zaporizhia power plants was tortured to death, brutally tortured. If you want, you can find this information about these tortures because he refused to work at the enterprise after the occupation, and two more trade union members and workers of this nuclear power plant were also illegally detained by the Russian soldiers, and they are considered missed, and no one know where they are. So there are more cases of when workers were kidnapped and tortured, especially workers of municipal administrations of the cities and municipal bodies of villages. They were kidnapped by the Russian soldiers, and they are prisoners illegally imprisoned now by Russian occupied forces. So that's why mostly we try to help evacuate our people, our members from these occupied territories, because we know the list of our members. But I think, of course, there might be possibilities that someone was still can't leave these occupied territories, of course, but we haven't received this information. We had information from our member whose children were deported to Russia, and it was a big problem for us as a union how to take back these children. But fortunately, thanks to the help of the Ukrainian authorities and NGOs, these children were back to Ukraine. But because of security reason, we can't provide more information regarding this case.
Marianne?
Thank you so much. The second question is, this is the question. I understand sexual abuse is still not criminalized in Ukraine, but are there attempts to change this legislatively? And do you feel optimistic about this initiative?
And it's addressed to who?
No, to anyone on the panel.
Anyone.
Yeah, maybe I could answer, as I already mentioned, that this important document to improve the system of protection was ratified, so-called Istanbul Convention, but actually legislatively sexual abuse and rape and sexual violence, it's criminalized. It's the issue, and in general, I would say the challenge of Ukrainian legislation that we have quite well developed mechanism and legislation, and the first law on domestic violence, where also sexual violence was mentioned so it was introduced like 2001 year, so long ago, and it was improved during a number of years. But the issue is its lack of trust of people to courts and in general to justice system. And for example, for sexual harassment, I would say we don't have any positive successful case on sexual harassment in labor in the labor market. Olesia, maybe if she knows something, could add, but I would say that it's very difficult to prove the issue in court, and in general to have transparency and trust to court system to implement this legislation. So I would say it's a major challenge to change, to improve the court system for survivors of this violence to trust. Because what we have even in educational institutions, I am the head of committee on prevention of sexual harassment, discrimination, and what I could see that for the last years there are more and more public cases on sexual harassment in different universities. At the same time, survivors are not ready to go in court and, to have to go so-called till the end to end successfully this issue. And I see that Olesia probably wants to add something.
Yes, Olesia, please.
Yes. Thank you, Tamara, for your answer. Yes, I just want to add, yes, it's hard to win the court case in case of the sexual harassment and workplaces. And we had some cases in our experience, and unfortunately we failed to protect these two female workers in courts because of lack of evidence and witnesses. And it was a problem, the first problem, because these video records and audio records, they can be as the evidence in court if these records were made by hiding a microphone or mobile phone. And the second issue was that sometimes mostly women are afraid of counterclaim to the court, because it's hard to when women that experienced the sexual harassment is fighting for justice. The employer or superior colleague can feel the complaint to court that this is not true, and trying to even to my colleagues maybe help me as the NACLEP. And also to sue this female worker for slander. Thank you. So that's why it's a problem, and we need to improve this practice in courts to protect our female workers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mike?
Yeah, I'll just move on to the next two questions. Thank you so much for all of these answers, and of course for the questions. Thomas has a question in terms of the sources of resistance to, in particular, the legalization of civil partnerships, either same-sex or opposite sex. But the focus of the question is, what are the sources of resistance to the advancement of women's rights in Ukraine? And if I can just invite Oksana just to give you a chance to speak, if you want to start off. I think all of you have something interesting to say. Go ahead, please, if that's okay.
I can, but I think Tamara is better to answer this. I will start because further questions below are more to me. But here, of course, I think it's more or less the same usual suspect. It's religious institutions, which Tamara was already mentioning in the context of Istanbul Convention ratifications. We have this Council of Churches, which is quite conservative, at least. And there are also small right-wing groups which call themselves like traditionalists, who are also against the advancement in women's rights. But I think Tamara can answer better.
Yeah, thank you. I was also writing on this, despite the fact that, LGBT issue is a litmus test, so-called, for democratic values. And maybe, if you analyze this concept of Ruski Mir, it's very homophobic and misogynistic. And, the fear of gay Europa, it's the concept that is very spread, very spread. At the same time, of course, in Ukraine, we do have groups of people who are against LGBT rights. At the same time, we do have LGBT military, among also veteran groups, and it's quite visible group fighting for their rights and for their visibility. And what is interesting to see the results of public opinion surveys. After full-scale invasion, the attitudes of Ukrainian society changed, I would say, the most towards LGBT people, because it's improved. So people, I would say, more positively express themselves towards the human rights for LGBT and towards same-sex partnerships. And I do think that very soon, probably this registered partnership legislation will be also implemented, because it's like step-by-step approach, and it's the same as with Istanbul Convention. It should be political will that finally it's a surprise for the feminist community that this Istanbul Convention was implemented. It was really a huge surprise. We didn't expect, so we do hope that despite the criticism of these groups, this legislation will be implemented, and it's a part of our European Union integration agenda. If we don't want to go together with Ruski Mir, we should go with Gayropa. Of course, it's like a joke, but it's very, I would say, it's like a very radical notion how it's perceived, that you should choose.
Okay, thank you very much, Oksana and Tamara. I'll move on to Kirill's question. You can see in the question and answer. And in broad strokes, what have Ukrainian unions been able to do to support refugees? I'm assuming in Ukraine. Has there been involvement and support from Western trade unions or indeed non-governmental organizations? What kind of programs and support is there for returning refugees, particularly, of course, as you've noted, forgive me, I forget exactly whom, the vast majority of refugees are women and children.
I suppose I will answer. Thank you for your question. Regarding the refugees, as I understand, there are internally displaced people in Ukraine and also refugees in other countries. And of course, in both groups, women with children are the majority, but also there are elderly people and people with disabilities. As the trade unions, as we try to provide any possible aid and accommodation to internally displaced people. These people fled from war, but they are still in Ukraine. And also provide some legal advice regarding the employment and workers' rights. Unfortunately, we don't have enough financial resources and human resources, but we cooperate with international, different foreign organizations, NGOs, and also appreciate help that we received from the International Trade Union Confederation, European Trade Union Confederation, National Trade Union Center from countries across the world. This aid was crucial for internally displaced people in Ukraine. Also, we appreciate the aid that we received from our colleagues who welcomed our refugees in different countries, especially in Europe. And regarding the Europe, there were a lot of projects supported by European Commissions and supported by European Trade Union Confederation and different foreign donors, in particular in Poland. Trade unions provided different types of aid, especially with employment and also legal advices and accommodation for Ukrainian refugees, women with children. The same projects were in France, in Germany, in different countries. So we appreciate this aid because the help from trade unions, the organizations that are trustworthy, was crucial, especially for female refugees, because there were cases of trafficking. Unfortunately, trafficking in particular in Poland. And as a Ukrainian Trade Union tries to provide any possible information regarding the employment and regarding the trade unions in different countries to Ukrainian internally displaced people who are going abroad to become refugees in other countries, because when they know that trade unions in this country can help them, they will call them in any cases, in case of trafficking and when there might be problems. So our strategy is to link Ukrainian refugees with trade union centers in different countries to ensure that their human rights and labor rights will be protected. And but the number of refugees are high. As for today, we see the tendencies that there are in some countries there are attempts to decrease the benefits and social payments for Ukrainian refugees. At the same time, the level of employment of Ukrainian refugees in some countries are more than 50%. So we see that Ukrainian employees are needed in Europe, but at the same time they are needed here because, for example, we need, let's say, we need 5 million workers now. And also after the during the process of rebuilding of Ukraine, we will need approximately 8 million workers in Ukraine. So of course we are interested to take our people back, but the first thing that stop Ukrainian refugees, especially women with children, from going back to Ukraine is a safety. Because even in Kyiv, you can't be protected for 100% despite the air defense system that we received thanks to the military aid from our foreign partners and other countries. And especially if mothers saw these pictures of the largest Ukrainian children's hospital in Kyiv that was targeted by missile. Regarding the program of for those who are back from Europe to Ukraine and other countries, yes, there is the governmental program of for employment, providing information regarding the possibilities of employment, some grants to start small businesses. And also this month, Ukrainian government with support of the United Nations launched the project of platform to provide different types of assistance and information for those refugees who want to back to Ukraine. But as a trade unions, we understand that Ukrainian refugees will back and they will need a decent work with the income that allows them to cover their needs and also cover the need for accommodation, because a lot of them lost their accommodation. They need money for renting the apartments, which is costly, especially in Kyiv. And or to buy houses. Yes, there are some governmental projects, but still it's a issue for a lot of internally displaced people and refugees. The second is that we need a program of reskilling workers, especially female workers, to take them back to labor market. Yes, there are some initiatives, especially initiative of German Ministry for Economy and Development. This initiative is to provide possibility to get new skills for Ukrainian refugees, and with these new skills, they will be back to Ukraine and help to rebuild Ukraine. But at the same time, as trade unions, we still promote that the level of labor rights must be high to take our employees back, especially when they saw the level of rights protection and benefits in different countries of Europe.
Okay, thank you very much.
You.
Oksana, I saw your hand up. Was that correct?
I just wanted to add briefly to what Olesia was very widely explaining. I mean, she mentioned very many important things, but I think the worst side of the policy or its absence is there is no program of social housing, because for the majority of people, the option to buy any housing or to rent for the rest of their lives when they're, for example, elderly people, it's not an option. And that without social housing, they won't go back, because I mean they will end up in the risk of becoming homeless one day, and that's not what they are willing to face. And another huge problem, which I'm speaking from my own experience and from the topics I'm dealing with, the that there is no program of reintegrating children back into Ukrainian educational system. And those people who left with children and are staying there, like one of the reasons I was myself out of Ukraine for more than 1 year with 2 school children. And one of the reasons why I came back at that moment, I was still planning to come back anyway, but why I came back at that moment, because I understood that I won't do homeschooling after German school for 1 more year. I just not going to do it. So for those people who are staying there longer and yet longer with children, meaning that their children will be integrated into educational system of Germany, Poland, Czech Republic, whatever country, and there is no steps visible on the side of government to address this problem. The only answers they have, of course, part of the schools are doing online schooling, and maybe some children are still managing to do 2 schools, but many schools dropped like this online schooling for children. Like, for example, many schools in Kyiv dropped those online teaching. And so it means that either you do homeschooling being a refugee after a German, for example, school your kid is attending, or you just give up. And by giving up, meaning that you are dropping off Ukrainian educational system totally. And that would be a huge issue, and that is not addressed at all.
Thank you very much. I see that our time has come to an end. We could ask a whole pile of more questions, I know, but let me take this final opportunity to thank our panelists. It has been extremely informative and very heartfelt, and we thank you for all the work that you're doing, and thank you for your presentations. This webinar will be posted. Marianne, why don't you speak on that? I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I wondered if we could do the one final question of what do people need from Western feminists?
I think that's a good question. I'd be very happy to continue. Yes,
or
Marianne. Okay. So if we could ask all the panelists, Marianne, ask the question.
Yeah, there's a number of questions, and we'll try to get these answered in a different way, but just the sort of wrap-up questions, I think, are: do you feel your voices are sufficiently heard abroad? Do you reach large-scale audiences? And what support do you need most from Western feminists?
And if we could have it, yes. Yes, so why don't we ask whoever who the panelists will go first. Yes, thank you.
I can start,
Oksana.
because my answer would be a pessimistic one, so not to end on a pessimistic note, I will start the round of answering. First of all, I'm mostly abstaining from intervening into Western discussions anymore. This event is an exception, because I'm tired, burned out, and I don't see them. I don't think that people can change their opinion at this moment. So opinions are made up already, arguments are voiced, they won't change after addressing them another 100 times. So I gave up on this part, mostly, I would say. But what is important, which support is important, to support those who don't give up yet, and to give them space to talk about the issues, to support social struggles in Ukraine, which are promoting gender equality in labor, care, I don't know, politics, all the other spheres of social life. For example, trade unions or feminist initiatives who are trying to challenge the very often unproductive and antisocial policies of Ukrainian government now and in the perspective of reconstruction. So this is a way to support these initiatives for doing these social struggles, is a way to address and to make the perspective of just reconstruction more possible, at least. And to those who are more on the kind of engaged on the level of European authorities, is to make pressure on the side of European authorities on Ukrainian government to have a more social just, gender just equality-oriented reconstruction program.
Olesia or Tamara, who would like to go next?
Okay, I will say that we still need your support, especially informational support, because the coverage of Ukrainian war is not the same as it was at the beginning of the full-scale invasion. And in many countries, even my trade union colleagues, they don't know that, for example, today were attacks on Ukrainian cities. And every day Russian forces shelled or use missiles or drones to kill Ukrainian people in peaceful cities. And a lot of women were killed even this last months because of the Russian attacks. So it's important to show that Ukraine still needs your support, and the war is going on, despite that you don't see these pictures, horrible pictures of war. And also we still need the military aid, because this military aid protects women and children. And as Oksana showed you, Ukrainian schools, examples of Kharkiv, where children continuing studying in schools and they need protection. And military aid is a protection of Ukrainian female workers, male workers, children, everyone. So we need this help. And also we need a solidarity and support in the direction of rebuilding of Ukraine, because as a trade union, we have in our agenda the just rebuilding of Ukraine and better new workplaces for workers, and these places must be with respect of workers' rights and also with gender equality. Thank you.
Tamara, do you have a few words?
Yes, I developed, I was, after evacuation from Kyiv, I became refugee scholar, ended up in Germany. And I'm very grateful actually to international community academic for their support. But at the same time, I see that actually our main supporters is Ukrainian diaspora in different countries, and very grateful for it. And what I've already mentioned, this notion of informed solidarity. Just solidarity is not enough, and by informed I mean, to provide voice, to hear, yes, to read what is already written, to make Ukraine and Ukrainian studies more visible. And sometimes we need actually really to match, to enter different interesting audiences. By now, the toughest, the most challenging audience were theologian feminists, priest, LGBT friendly, but they are pacifist. And for them, they couldn't understand why we ask for protection, for heavy weapon, and this project that I'm doing, it's militarization of women. But when you explain more and more, and I wrote paper for the journal, I hope it will be published. So this notion, this idea, I called informed solidarity. And I agree that Ukraine, the topic of Ukraine and war and invasion is fading out from media, unfortunately, and it's our daily reality for many years, and it's really challenging to keep it alive. So we are very grateful to you that you arranged this event, for your support, for visibility, and it's very, I'm very also grateful that you started from this feminist topic. It's usually not the first topic to start, you know, different events, gender usually in the very end of some very general events. And I think Oksana and Olesia will agree that we are very grateful to you for organizing this and for trying to hear our voice. And we hope that it will, that Ukraine, Ukrainian studies, topic of Ukraine will be keep alive in, in international arena more. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all very much for the panelists and the participants. And with that, we say goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Have you, Marianne, have you stopped recording?
Oh, that's a good point. Thank you.